Let's now shift focus over to Russia. A group of anti-Putin Russian nationals who are aligned with the Ukrainian army have claimed responsibility for an attack, that too in Russia's southwestern region of Belgorod. Now, this region borders northeastern Ukraine. Two areas of the region were then hit by unmanned aerial vehicles, causing two houses to catch fire. While one civilian from a village has died due to cross-border fighting, about 100 others were evacuated from the Russian border settlement in Belgorod. The attack has arrived as a rude shock, giving the world dramatic images of Russian nationals actively taking up arms against the Kremlin. Smoke was also seen, as you can see in these visuals, rising from apparent explosions in the regional capital of Belgorod. Local authorities have confirmed what they described as two drone strikes. So, which groups have taken responsibility for this attack? Let me tell you, on Telegram, there was a post sent out. The Freedom for Russia Legion said that this group and another group, the Russian Volunteer Corps, continue to liberate the Belgorod region. This post described the groups as patriot volunteers and claims that Russia was vulnerable to attack. This as Russia has no reserves to respond to military crises. All military personnel are dead, wounded or in Ukraine. This is what this group had to say. At the same time, there's equally interesting news coming in related to the war. The leader of Russia's Wagner private mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, has said that Moscow's plan to demilitarize Ukraine has failed. Blaming the invasion, Prigozhin has said that it is what has turned Ukraine's army into one of the most powerful in the world. Interestingly, he also predicts that the war may be ending with a mutiny by Russian soldiers. Let's listen in to what Sergei Shoigu is saying as far as the war is concerned.
On May 22nd of this year, a unit of Ukrainian nationalist formation invaded the territory of Russian Federation in the area of international checkpoint Kozinka in the Belgorod region. In the course of counter-terrorist operation, the nationalist formations were blocked and defeated by airstrikes, artillery fire and the active actions of the cover units of the state border of the Western Military District. The remnants of the nationalists were driven back to the territory of Ukraine, when they continued to be hit by fire until they were completely eliminated.
As far as the claims of the attack in Belgorod are concerned, let's try and get in a sense of perspective in terms of how Russia has been reacting. And for that, I'm joined in by senior political analyst and Russian affairs expert Fred Weir, who's joining me live from Moscow at this hour. Thank you, Fred, for joining in. How's the attack playing out in Belgorod, in Russia, within the political circles and the media?
Well, it's been intensively covered in the media as a Ukrainian incursion. That's the way the media views it. And various rationalizations that you find in Russian media coverage is that it's an attempt to distract Russian forces from the south, where they will be expecting a Ukrainian counteroffensive any day now. Also, that it's an attempt to distract from the Russian victory at Bakhmut last weekend. So it's a propaganda stunt. The thing is that it seems that these forces were, they might have been directed by Ukraine. They were certainly armed and equipped by Ukraine, but they seem to be exiled Russians. Anti-Kremlin, anti-Putin activists, far-right activists from Russia, who were inserted into these three places in Russia, in southern Russia, perhaps to confuse, to create a sense of instability, but also perhaps with the idea that maybe Russia is ripe for revolution. If you just create a spark, people will rise up against Putin. That's a common thing. If you remember well, I was a young man, but the Bay of Pigs, the invasion of Cuba in 1962. The idea of sending Cuban exiles into Cuba was to stimulate an anti-Castro revolution. Didn't work, but the idea was there, and I believe in Ukrainian intelligence services and so on. They have this idea that Russia is soft. The Russian population are angry and irate and ready to perhaps rise up if you just poke them.
Right. Um, Fred, now let's talk about the symbolism of this attack in Belgorod. Does the incident signal the emergence of serious armed opposition inside Russia against the Kremlin, that too on Russian territory?
I doubt that. I mean, we cannot know. There is a fair amount of sabotage that goes on, you know, and there have been those assassinations of Russian journalists. Uh, all of it seems directed by the Ukrainian security services, but clearly they're finding people inside Russia to cooperate with. So it's hard to say, but I don't believe the Russian population at large is susceptible to these kind of appeals. I don't see around me or sense that there is angry anti-Putin or anti-Kremlin sentiment. I don't think this incursion will have left any lasting effects. And it does seem that the Russians have at this point rebuffed it.
Right.
So it seems to be over.
No, Fred, but let's talk about the ownership of the attack. The Freedom for Russia Legion and another group, the Russian Volunteer Corps, have already owned up in a post that they shared on Telegram. What does that speak of the popular sentiment or the majority within Russia?
Well, yes, that's right. There are a lot of Russians who, in the past decade or so, have moved to Ukraine. People who are just irreconcilably anti-Putin, who saw hope in the 2014 Maidan revolution. Some of them have joined these armed militias, and they're clearly being armed by Ukraine. I don't know where else they would get American armored vehicles, for instance, to stage an operation like this, and probably directed by Ukraine. But yes, their numbers are not that great on the scale of things. I guess there were a couple hundred of them. But yes, I think that is a fact. There are such people in numbers, and they are working in Ukrainian or with the Ukrainian armed forces, and the Russian media and officialdom do not recognize that.
Fred, after the strike on the bridge between Russia and Crimea in October last year, then the recent drone strike above the Kremlin, how will the attack in Belgorod now play out in the propaganda war?
Well, I think it does have a lot of pro-Ukrainian impact. I think the Ukrainians are seen as fighting Russia in many different ways, imaginative. But on the whole, it is PR. It's none of these attacks are very effective militarily, and the Russian. But of course, I think the main question here is, will it rattle the Russian population? Are the Russian population getting scared? Because that would be the purpose, to get in by invading Russia, showing the vulnerability and weakness of the Russian armed forces and security services. All of these attacks have that effect. The attack on the Kremlin a couple of weeks ago. There was a previous incursion into Russian territory. All these things are, I think, aimed there at doing that, not winning the war, but it's psychological to try to affect the Russian population, create cracks or weaknesses.
Right. Fred, let's also talk about something else that's making news on the war front. There's been an interview that the Wagner chief, Yevgeny Prigozhin, has given, in which he said that Russia's invasion of Ukraine has turned Ukraine's army into one of the most powerful in the world. He's even suggested that the war may end with a mutiny by Russian soldiers. How do you assess such thoughts coming from one of those representing Russia, that too on the front line and fighting a significant battle in Bakhmut?
I think he's certainly right about the strength of the Ukrainian army. It has mobilized its largest, besides Russia, the largest and most powerful, best equipped army in Europe. Um, um, I don't know, he would know better than me about the danger of mutiny in the Russian armed forces. I would only caution that he is fighting his own PR battle against the defense ministry. He wants certain things for himself, and he says a lot of scaremongering things. It's not clear for whom they're intended, and or how realistic it is. For instance, he doesn't do the things he threatens to do. He threatened to pull out of Bakhmut on Victory Day. He didn't. He never did. In fact, he finished the battle. Now his men are going for rotation for a month of rest. I think he wants to come back in a new capacity. I think he's fighting a political battle in Moscow, and all of us scrambling after what he has to say and wondering what he means and how true it is are not his concern.
I'm sure Prigozhin's credibility will be tested in the days to come. Many thanks to you, Fred Weir, for joining in. It's been a pleasure to have you as always.